wasn't supposed to go to that party. It was one of those upscale neighborhood gatherings. Craft cocktails, boutique cheese boards, and too many people pretending to like each other. The kind of party where people shake hands while checking out who's wearing the most expensive watch. My wife Renee had been buzzing about it all week. She'd picked out a new dress, spent 2 hours getting ready, and made sure I knew it was more her thing than mine. I was fine with skipping it, honestly. I'd planned to stay home, order wings, and catch the late game. But something in her voice when she said, "You'll just be bored there anyway," pulled at me. So I went. Not to spy. Not even because I didn't trust her. I went because my gut didn't sit right. It had been building up little things. Late-night texts with her phone turned away from me. Laughter that faded when I walked into her room. A new perfume she never wore around me. But I kept telling myself I was overthinking. It's what love does, doesn't it? It blinds you just enough to keep you guessing. When I arrived, the place was already packed. People I barely knew offered fake smiles and backhanded compliments. I was 3 sips into a watered-down whiskey when I saw her. Renee was across the room near the backyard doors, leaning in too close to a man I didn't recognize, all confident. A smirk that didn't hide his hand on the small of her back. Familiar, casual. She laughed in that way she hadn't laughed with me in months, the kind of laugh that wasn't for polite company. It was for him. And then she kissed him. Not the kind of kiss you give a friend. Not something mistakable. It wasn't even a second too long. It was deliberate, bold, like she didn't care who saw. And I was standing right there. Everything around me slowed. I didn't make a scene. I didn't shout. I didn't march over like in those dramatic movies she always watched. I simply set my drink down on the nearest table, turned, and walked out. The cool night air hit my face, and I just kept walking. No destination, no plan, just me and the dull throb of betrayal rising in my chest. I walked for hours through streets I didn't know. Neighborhoods I'd never been in. Didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. She wasn't looking for me. By the time I reached home, it was past 3 a.m. The house was dark. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and sat down in the living room. Silence. The kind that doesn't just fill a room. It presses on your chest. I didn't sleep. Around 6 a.m., I heard the door creak open. She tiptoed in, thinking I'd be asleep or out of town. She was barefoot, heels in her hand, dress slightly wrinkled, makeup smudged around the edges. Her expression when she saw me sitting there, pure panic. But I didn't say a word. She opened her mouth to speak, but I stood. Up, walked past her, grabbed my keys, and left. That's when the tears started. She thought she'd get ahead of it, maybe lie, maybe gaslight me into thinking I was the problem. But the silence, it ruined her script. It flipped the power she thought she had. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I'd left her there, standing in our hallway with her lies tangled in her hair and a truth she never expected to face. But this was only the beginning. Renee didn't cry in front of me. Not yet. I never gave her that chance. I didn't leave in anger. I didn't storm out or break anything. But I also didn't disappear. I just shifted. I moved in silence like someone watching a house burn from a distance. It was surreal, standing in the ashes of a life I thought we shared while she was still inside. Pretending the fire wasn't real. She thought she could explain her way out of it. Maybe she thought the kiss was forgettable. Maybe she assumed I saw it wrong. But I didn't just see the kiss. What she didn't know was how much I already knew. Before that party, months earlier, I'd started noticing changes in her behavior, the usual ones. Distance, late-night messages, unexplained absences. But it wasn't until she came home one night, buzzing from a girls' night, with smudged eyeliner and no earrings on, when I clearly saw both when she left that I knew something was off. Instead of confronting her, I became a quiet observer. I began recording her calls legally, of course using voice-activated devices in our home that she once insisted we get for safety. She didn't know they worked just fine, and I didn't tell her. I kept backups of our shared cloud data, photos, locations, synced apps, 2 weeks before the party. Listened to a conversation she had in our bedroom while I was out grocery shopping. She thought she was safe. She even giggled when he told her, "You always look better without the ring." And she didn't even hesitate to respond. "It doesn't even feel like I'm married anymore." I remember sitting in the car in the parking lot that day, phone in hand, staring at the dashboard like it was a confessional booth. That sentence hit harder than any scream ever could. So when I saw them at the party, it wasn't shock, it was confirmation. That moment sealed the deal, not because I hadn't believed it before, but because it showed me what I was really dealing with. A woman who had already moved on long before I ever walked away. And yet, instead, I decided to give her the illusion of control for just a little longer. People underestimate how powerful silence can be. She assumed I would explode. She probably rehearsed a dozen ways to twist it back on me. "You never showed me enough affection," or "it just happened one time." But I gave her none of that. I went back home, and by the time she woke up from her post-party hangover, I was gone. I didn't leave the city. I stayed in a short-term rental about 25 minutes away. Not hidden, just elsewhere, detached. I needed to observe what she'd do when she thought I'd abandoned ship. Would she break down? Would she chase? Or would she simply invite him into the life we built? Turns out it didn't take her long to switch gears. The next evening, while I watched from a quiet, parked car a few houses down, he pulled into my driveway. My driveway. The one I spent weekends resurfacing, the one I shoveled clear every winter while she stayed warm inside. They didn't even wait until the house lights were off. They walked in together like they owned it, and I let them. I didn't knock. I didn't confront. I just sat there in the dark, engine off, courting the timestamp and letting reality harden in my chest like cooling iron. She didn't know she'd already handed me every weapon I needed, quietly, arrogantly, and with a smile. She was building. Her fantasy, not realizing the floor beneath it was already crumbling, not realizing that I wasn't gone. I was just watching and planning. The morning after I left, I returned, but not in the way she expected. There's a chair in a hotel lounge. Downtown on the 3rd floor? It sits by a window overlooking the back alley of a law office, a nail salon, and a row of high-rise condos. Nothing fancy, but from that angle, you can see the reflection in the glass of anyone walking into the hotel lobby without them seeing. That's where I sat, legs crossed, coffee untouched, waiting, because I wasn't trying to disappear. I wasn't running from her. I wanted to see who she became when I removed myself from the script, the version of her that showed up once she believed the man who knew her best had given up. Renee arrived at the hotel around 11 a.m., sunglasses on, hair tied up, wearing the green coat I bought her last Christmas. She stood just inside the lobby, scanning her phone, clearly waiting for someone. Not me. Not anymore. When he showed up 5 minutes later, he kissed her cheek like they'd been doing it for months. Not the clumsy kind of kiss that says, "We're sneaking around," but the kind that says, "We've already stopped caring, who knows?" And there it was. Freedom. Not mine, hers. She felt it. She was glowing in it. She thought I'd forfeited everything. With my silence, no confrontation meant no resistance. No resistance meant she could skip the guilt and go straight into reinvention. And while she was sipping wine at the rooftop bar with him, I wasn't plotting revenge. I was writing emails. I was drafting a contract. I was resetting every lock, redirecting every shared asset, logging out of every synced account. I had met with our financial advisor an hour before she arrived at that hotel, signed a full separation clause, froze our shared cards, and sent a notice of asset hold to our mortgage provider. I'd already emptied my half of the joint savings legally, methodically, quietly. By the time she walked back out of the hotel, tipsy and giddy, half her digital world was already locked behind a new password she didn't know existed. She didn't even realize she was smiling into a future that had been silently edited, and I just watched, not through anger, not from pride, from a distance so cold it burnt. There was something beautiful in how fast she shed the version of herself that once swore she'd never betray me. I think that's what struck me most. The ease, the casual nature of her undoing. She didn't wrestle with it, she danced. That night, I returned home. But to stay, just to take one thing, the chair by the bay window, the one I always sat in while reading, drinking coffee, watching the street. I didn't leave a note. I didn't change anything else. I left the bed untouched, the photos on the shelf, the wine glasses still drying beside the sink. Just that single empty space by the window. It wasn't about furniture. It was a message. I'd seen enough. Now it was her turn. 3 days passed before Renee noticed what was missing. Not the chair, not the money, not me. It was the sound of nothing. No phone buzz, no return texts, no we need to talk. I'd erased myself from the usual equation, and that's when she began to panic. But this part wasn't for her. It was for me. I didn't go to friends. I didn't stay with family. I checked into a private ecolodge outside the city. No TV, no Wi-Fi, just a quiet cabin with a thick pine wood table and a fireplace that never stopped crackling. I brought only 3 things with me: a photo album from our first 5 years of marriage, a single mug, and a folder of documents she didn't know existed. I spent those days writing. Not letters, not journal entries, not angry rants. I wrote statements, hard facts, moments I had filed away for years thinking they didn't matter. The times she turned on me in subtle, humiliating ways, not in front of crowds but behind closed doors. Like the time she laughed when I said I was proud of the promotion I got and said, "That's cute. Maybe now we can afford real furniture." Or how she joked to her coworkers at our dinner party, calling me the dull one while I cleaned up the dishes. Small things, right? But they built something, not resentment, but clarity. I started seeing her not as a monster, but as someone who never actually saw me as real. I was a placeholder, a provider, background noise to her performances. It was freeing and horrifying. On the 4th night, my phone lit up in the dark. Okay, locked a number, I let it ring out, then a voicemail. Almost careful. "Hey, just wondering where you are. You're left, and I'm still trying to understand why you're making such a big deal out of." Well, whatever it is you think you saw. No apology, not even an attempt at real empathy, just soft manipulation. Classic Renee. She wasn't unraveling yet, but she was trying to regain control. The silence was twisting her thoughts because, for once, she didn't have access to my reaction, and that scared her more than any fight ever could. That's when I made the next move. I mailed a package to our house. Inside was a printout of her text exchange with him from 2 nights ago, a photo of them leaving the hotel time-stamped, and a handwritten note. "Don't worry, I'm not mad. I just want you to have all the pieces. Before the next guest sits at your table, no signature, no threats, just the truth." I wanted her to understand the dinner was already over. The plates were cleared, the conversation had ended. The only thing left was the sound of her own fork scraping against an empty plate. Renee didn't text me again. Not after the package, not after the photo, not after the note. For the first time in our entire marriage, she had no idea what I would do next. And I think that's what started to break her. It's not guilt, not regret, but the unraveling loss of control. She thrived on knowing the outcome before it happened. Always 3 emotional moves ahead, always ready with the next version of the truth. But silence is a game she never learned to play, and I was playing it to win. By then, the house was no longer legally ours. I had started the property transfer weeks before the party, back when I first felt something was rotting underneath our daily routines. I moved my name, my stake, everything I could into a private trust. She hadn't noticed the signs, hadn't asked about the envelope from the notary that came, addressed only to me, hadn't thought twice when I asked her to stop using my email for Amazon login. These weren't random decisions, they were chess pieces. All moved quietly while she danced around with her new partner, like I didn't know how to see. But I saw everything. I spent that 5th night walking through the woods near the lodge, surrounded by trees taller than any lie she ever told. I didn't think about her crying or who she was texting in desperation. I thought about how strange it is that a person can live beside you for years, sleep inches from your face, say "I love you" with convincing tone, and still be hiding a completely different life behind their eyes. That's the kind of grief you don't talk about. It's not cinematic, it's not loud. It's the kind that folds inside you like crushed glass in your chest. At sunrise, I drove into town. There's no plan, just instinct. I parked outside the cafe where she and I used to sit on Saturdays, the one with the cracked blue tile tables and the crooked chalkboard sign out front. I hadn't been there in months, maybe years. The same woman was working behind the counter, and she smiled like nothing had changed, because to her, nothing had. That's the strange part about betrayal. It's seismic for you, but invisible to everyone else. I sat at the far table, opened my notebook, and started writing down everything I remembered about our first year together. Not the fights, not the bad signs, just the small moments, the good ones. I wanted to figure out when it started to fade, when we stopped seeing each other and started performing, somewhere between our second anniversary and her sudden obsession with finding herself. Things had shifted. Not in obvious ways, but in the slow disintegration of shared attention. She stopped asking how I slept. I stopped mentioning the dreams I had. We became polite, and polite is dangerous when you're supposed to be in love. That night, I finally answered one of her texts. Just one line. I left you long before I walked out the door. I think you know that now. It was the only reply she got, and I didn't wait to see if she responded. Instead, I booked a return flight. Not home, just away, where with ocean air and silence so thick it would drown any remaining echoes of her voice in my mind. Shocked me most was how easy it was to breathe once I made the choice. It turns out grief only lingers if you keep feeding it. I had stopped, and that was the first real freedom I'd felt in years. There's something surreal about walking through your old life as if you were never there. I did it quietly 2 weeks after leaving everything behind. I flew back in without telling a soul. No hotel, no rented cabin this time. I stayed in the same city, just a different version of it. I booked a corporate suite under a name that wasn't mine in a building I used to drive past every day on my way to work, never once thinking I'd end up hiding behind tinted windows, just to catch a glimpse of what my life had become without me in it. It was raining when I went back. Not heavy, just that cold spring drizzle that makes everything look like a memory. I sat across from our house her house Nand. I watched, not like a stalker, not like a man desperate for a second chance, like someone watching a documentary. On mute, trying to recognize faces in a film he didn't direct. She was in the living room, same throw blanket, same lamp I'd always wanted to replace, but the energy was different, nervous. Her pacing wasn't random. She was waiting for something. Or someone. When the car pulled up, I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. He didn't even check to see if anyone was watching. He just walked up like he belonged, like there had never been a wedding in that house. Like he didn't know a man once painted every wall in that home by hand, bloodied his knuckles fixing the back gate, spent a year of his life renovating that kitchen just so she could host her wine nights in style. He brought flowers. I don't know why that detail hit me the way it did. I brought her flowers once a week for years, and she barely noticed. He shows up with a gas station bouquet, and suddenly she's glowing like a high school girl who just got asked to prom. That's when I realized it had never been about what I gave. It was about what she wanted to feel. And with me, she had stopped wanting. You can't compete with the fantasy someone builds when they're tired of the truth. I watched them eat dinner, candlelight laughter. She leaned in, touched his arm, whispered something, and he smiled the way I used to, the way I probably hadn't. In a long time, and then, just as quickly, her face changed. It was subtle, a flicker, but I know that face. She was performing. Not lying, performing. She wasn't happy. She was pretending to be happy. And I realized that all of this, the affair, the departure, the reinvention, was her way of writing over a life she couldn't handle fixing. You see, it's easier to cheat than it is to confront. It's easier to start over than to admit you broke something that still had value. And it's far easier to blame boredom than to say, I gave up. I could have knocked on that door. I could have confronted them. I could have demanded apologies, explanations, closure. But I didn't want closure. I wanted freedom, so I walked away. Again, only this time I didn't feel like I'd lost anything. Felt finished. When I returned to my hotel that night, I made a single call to a moving service. I gave them access to a storage unit in another state. Everything that mattered to me was already there. Art, journals, clothes, my tools. I had spent the last 2 weeks building a new version of myself in secret, one she'd never get to know. Not despite her, but because I had to exist outside of her reach to feel real again. She thought she had broken me by kissing another man at a party, but what she didn't know, what she still doesn't understand, is that the version of me she betrayed wasn't the one I was becoming. That man was already fading, and in his place, someone far stronger was waking up. No more quiet watching, no more memory lanes. Just a new life completely removed from the woman who mistook silence for surrender. I didn't answer her call, but I heard her voice anyway. It wasn't on purpose. I wasn't stalking. I wasn't trying to catch her again. It was a coincidence. Maybe fate, maybe something else. I was sitting at a restaurant in the west side of town. I used to visit alone during business lunch's quiet place. Corner booth, black coffee and fresh bread kind of place. I'd gone there that afternoon just to think, just to sit somewhere without her shadow. But shadows travel. 3 tables away, she was there. Not physically. Her friend was. A mutual friend. Someone from her yoga group. Someone I only remembered because she once gave us a plant for our anniversary. I was half done with my espresso when I recognized the voice, loud, loose, and careless. The woman was on a call, laughing about a story, and the name she mentioned next to Renee was jarring. Not because I expected silence, but because of the way she said it, like Renee was a myth, like she wasn't a real person but a character in a juicy novel. "No, she's not doing well," the friend said into the phone, almost whispering now. He didn't even fight her, just left. She thought he'd explode. Instead, he vanished. It's killing her. She says she dreams of him standing in the hallway, staring at her, saying nothing. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn to look. I just listened. She thought she had more time, the friend continued. More power. She was trying to juggle both, the guy and the marriage, but she lost control. He outplayed her. Now she's afraid she'll never get to say the right version of the story. That last part stayed with me. It's a right version of the story. What even is that? The right version for her. The one where she blames disconnection, emotional neglect. It's where she paints me as the man who stopped showing up just enough to justify her need for something new? Or was it the version where I was too quiet, too stable, too safe? Funny how stability becomes unattractive when someone's looking for chaos to excuse their selfishness. I paid my check and left without looking back. That night, I didn't sleep in a hotel. I slept in my car, parked behind the old music store I used to visit as a teenager. It was strange, being in the same place as my younger self. The kid who once dreamed of finding a woman to love forever, who thought effort and loyalty and shared goals would be enough, who didn't yet understand that not everyone who says I love you means I'll protect you. I woke up early and I drove to the courthouse. No drama, no lawyer speeches, no fanfare. It's just a man filing papers. Separation, no contact, no contest. Just freedom, documented and processed. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of final clarity, because I finally saw what this whole thing had taught me. I had spent years maintaining something built by 2 people, but only one of us had stayed at work. She walked off the site. She stopped showing up. And I kept hammering, building walls around a foundation she was quietly setting fire to. And now, the house was gone. So I signed the papers. I declined mediation. I waived anything beyond what was fair. I didn't want the house. I didn't want the car. I didn't want the memories. I just wanted the silence to be mine now, no longer. A weapon she feared, but a place where I could breathe without someone else's lies echoing through it. It took me exactly 83 days to feel peace again. Not the kind of peace that comes from distractions or from pretending nothing happened. I'm talking about the kind that lives in your bones, the kind that shows up slowly, like morning light through drawn curtains. It was the day I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about her in over a week. Not her voice, not her face, not even the unanswered questions I used to wrestle with in the dark. I was living in a different city by then. I traded noise for stillness, concrete for coastline. My apartment was small, simple, and entirely mine. There was no guest room, no shared calendar, no arguments about laundry. The quiet was full of space I never knew I needed. I'd started writing again. Not about her, not about pain, just about ordinary things. People, colors, the taste of sea salt on wind. I'd stopped trying to explain what happened. It didn't need explaining anymore. One morning, I got a letter. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a folded note, short, barely 2 paragraphs. No apologies, just a reflection. She wrote that she never thought I'd actually leave. She had rehearsed every fight, every confrontation, but she never prepared for stillness. And now she understood not just what she lost, but who I had been all along. She said she wouldn't reach out again, but she didn't. I didn't keep the letter. I didn't need to. I stood on the shore that evening barefoot, watching the tide roll in as the sun dipped low. People walked by with dogs, with children, with coffees and laughter and earbuds and dreams. Nobody knew what I had lost. Nobody cared. And that was the beauty of it. I wasn't a broken man. I wasn't a betrayed husband. I wasn't a story about infidelity. I was just a person again, breathing. I met someone eventually. Didn't happen like in the movies. No faded glances, no romantic soundtrack. She was reading at the same coffee shop I always sat in. Different book, different rhythm. But something about the way she ignored her phone and smiled at the old couple beside her made me speak. It was natural, simple, human. We didn't talk about exes. We didn't compare scars. We talked about where. We liked to hike, the weird dreams we had as kids, what kind of world we'd build if we had $1 billion and no rules. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was hearing me. It's not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. That's how healing works. It doesn't explode into your life. It just starts showing up in tiny ways. In laughter that doesn't feel forced, in mornings that don't feel heavy, and in strangers that feel like beginnings. I don't hate Renee. I don't love her either. I just let her exist somewhere in my past, like an old song you no longer play but still remember every word to. She taught me something vital, that silence is not weakness, that walking away isn't. Giving up, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave a room without slamming the door.